I'm Nancy D. Welcome to Visions of the Past. Until the 1970s, the town of Sandy, Oregon was known to most travelers as the gateway to Mount Hood, the last town to gas up or get something to eat before you started your trip up Highway 26 to play in the snow or over the mountain to Hood River or Bend. Today, in the year 2003, the town almost conjoins Gresham and Portland with a population of approximately 6,000. I'm going to take you on a journey into the birth and early years of Sandy. After all, this little town played a major role with the first settlers and pioneers traveling the Oregon and Barlow trails. Did you know you too travel parts of these trails when you drive up Highway 26 to Mount Hood, or 211 to Estacada, maybe even Ten Eyck Road to Bull Run? Think of the ruts in the asphalt as ruts made in the mud from wagons making the same journey only 200 years ago. To begin telling the story of Sandy, we must go back before Oregon became a state. Did Lewis and Clark's travels through Oregon help cap it as a land with value? And who on earth would want to live in Indian country? Sit back, relax, and picture yourself in the early 1800s as we explore Sandy through the pages of Phil Junsrud's new book, 80 Years in the Same Neighborhood. We're going to go back to the 1800s, before Oregon was a state, before Oregon was even thought of. In 1800, our nation's leaders knew very little about what existed in the Oregon country, a vast area roughly extending from the Rockies to the Pacific. Actually, they knew little about the area west of the Mississippi, as the river pretty much marked America's western frontier. Most everything west of the Mississippi was Indian country. Our leaders did know that Spain had sent expeditions into Mexico and Texas, setting up a string of missions that extended through the southwest to what is now Southern California to the Pacific Ocean. They also knew that Spanish, British, and American ships had charted much of the Pacific coast, and they knew that America's Captain Robert Gray had discovered and named the Columbia River. They also had heard of British Lieutenant Broughton's account of having traveled nearly easterly 100 miles from the Oregon coast on the Columbia River. President Thomas Jefferson and other American leaders at that time had hoped that the Columbia River extended a long way east so that it could provide a waterway for easy transportation from the Midwest to the Pacific. Jefferson was interested in getting the U.S. into the Oregon country so they could become more actively involved in fur trading. Of course, he was also hopeful that he could acquire that land someday. But he definitely needed to have information about what was there in the vast unknown country. When Thomas Jefferson took office as the third president of the United States, only 4 roads crossed the Appalachian Mountains to the west, and then only as far as Kentucky. Any travel further west was by Indian trails. There were a few small settlements along the Mississippi, such as St. Louis, but they had been reached by ships traveling the Gulf of Mexico and up the river. The western 2/3 of what would become the U.S. was unexplored. Jefferson took a chance and began to organize the Lewis and Clark expedition to attempt an exploratory trip westerly through and into land for which America did not have clear title. Due to unavoidable delays in getting outfitted for the trip, the Lewis and Clark expedition didn't get underway until August 31st, 1803. They continued the difficult trip, crossing the Rockies in August, and eventually getting to the Columbia River, where they resumed water travel, arriving at the Oregon coast in early December. The winter of 1805 to 1806 was a miserably wet one. They spent in a 50-foot square log building they named Fort Clatsop. They left the Pacific coast in late March of 1806. On September 30th, 1806, they landed back in St. Louis, and the trip was completed. This amazing expedition had experienced many hardships, but collected priceless information on the land, terrain, water sources, flora, fauna, etc., and found out which Indian tribes were friendly. Lewis's detailed notes gave our government a wealth of knowledge and assurance that the Oregon Country was a valuable area. Join us each episode as we explore the rich history that surrounds our growing area. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nancy D., keeping you in touch with visions of the past. Bye.